Biker gang leader noticed the little girl's bruises. What he did next shocked the whole town. The rumble of motorcycle engines, a sonic declaration of the Iron Wolves' presence, shattered the peace of Oak Ridge. Storefront windows rippled as the chrome machines, led by Jake "Slick" Thornton, commanded the street. But Jake slowed his bike. Outside the community center, a small figure sat alone on the concrete steps. A girl, no more than 6, hunched over, her arms wrapped around her knees. Even from the street, Jake could see the dark bruises on her thin arms. Her oversized clothes hung loose. Jake pulled his bike to the curb. The sudden silence as the engine's cut was deafening. He swung his leg over his motorcycle, his heavy boots scraping the pavement as he approached the steps. "Hey, kid," he called out, his voice gentler than its usual rasp. "You all right?" The girl flinched but didn't look up. Jake crouched down, keeping a careful distance. Up close, the purple marks were uglier, telling a stark story of pain and fear. "What's your name?" he asked, low and steady. "Emily." The word was a fragile whisper. The community center door burst open. Maggie Callahan rushed out, her face etched with concern, quickly moving to Emily's side to drape a jacket over the small arms, attempting to cover the marks. "Jake," Maggie said, her voice tight with pleading worry. "You don't want to get involved in this. Please." Her eyes held a deep knowledge of the horrors she wished she didn't carry. Jake remained still, his gaze fixed on Emily. The girl hadn't moved, but her fear radiated off her. His weathered features softened, recognizing a chord struck deep within him. Then his jaw clenched. He looked at the bruises again, his expression hardening. An old, familiar anger mixed with a powerful protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. The air grew heavy with his decision. Maggie saw the look in his eyes. "Jake," she warned again. "She's been through enough already." But Jake wasn't listening. His path was set. He rose slowly to his full height, his shadow engulfing Emily's small form. Whatever darkness had touched this child's life, whatever pain had been inflicted, the Iron Wolves' direct action began now. It ended today. Jake's boots hit the pavement with purpose as he strode toward the beat-up sedan. The car had seen better days. Rust eating at its edges, a spider web of cracks spreading across the windshield. Through the dirty glass, he could see Emily's father shifting uncomfortably in the driver's seat. The leather of Jake's vest creaked as he approached, each step deliberate and menacing. The morning sun caught the chrome studs on his boots, sending little flashes of light dancing across the asphalt. The father's eyes darted left and right, like a trapped animal searching for escape. Jake planted himself beside the driver's side door, his shadow falling across the man's face. "Get out," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Emily's father's hand trembled as he reached for the door handle. The hinges groaned in protest as he pushed it open, nearly stumbling as he emerged. Up close, Jake could smell the stale cigarette smoke clinging to the man's clothes and the faint whiff of yesterday's whiskey on his breath. "Listen, man," the father started, trying to draw himself up to his full height, but still falling short of Jake's imposing frame. "I don't know what you think you're doing." But Jake cut him off, grabbing a fistful of his shirt. "Those bruises on your daughter's arms," he said, each word precise and sharp as a knife. "Want to explain those to me?" The father's face flushed red. "I've been trying my best," he stammered, his earlier bravado crumbling. "You don't understand what it's like, raising a kid on your own. Sometimes things get rough." Jake's grip tightened, the fabric bunching in his fist. "Rough?" he repeated, his voice dropping even lower. The word hung in the air between them like poison. "I mean," the father's voice cracked, his eyes darting everywhere but Jake's face. "She can be difficult sometimes. Won't listen. I'm doing what I can." Jake pushed him back against the car, the metal groaning under the impact. "You're done," he said, his words carved from ice. "You hear me? You're done hurting her." Sweat beaded on the father's forehead. "You can't tell me what to do with my own kid," he protested weakly, but there was fear in his eyes now, raw and real. "I'm not telling you anything," Jake replied. "I'm warning you. Stay away from her. If I see another bruise on that girl, if I hear you've been anywhere near her." He left the threat unfinished, letting the man's imagination fill in the blanks. The father's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Okay," he whispered, then louder. "Okay, okay. Just, just let me go." Jake released his grip on the man's shirt, taking a step back. The father immediately straightened his clothes with shaking hands, trying to reclaim some dignity. "Get out of here," Jake commanded. "And remember what I said." The man scrambled back into his car, fumbling with his keys. The engine sputtered to life, and he reversed so quickly he nearly hit a trash can. Jake watched as the sedan peeled away, tires squealing against the pavement. Standing there in the parking lot, Jake could feel the weight of eyes on him, the community center staff peering through windows, locals watching from nearby storefronts. The father's car disappeared around a corner, leaving nothing but the acrid smell of burning rubber and the echo of Jake's warning hanging in the air. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the community center's parking lot as Maggie hurried after Jake. Her sensible shoes clicked against the pavement, each step filled with urgency. Jake had already mounted his motorcycle, but hadn't started the engine yet. "Wait, Jake," Maggie called out, her silver hair catching the sunlight. "You don't understand what you've just done." Jake turned, his expression hard but patient. "What's there to understand? That little girl was hurt. I stopped it." Maggie wrung her hands, her kind face creased with worry. "It's not that simple. Emily's story. It's more complicated than you know." She glanced back at the community center where Emily sat, still hunched over on the steps. "That poor child has been through so much already." "Tell me," Jake said, his voice softer now. Maggie took a deep breath. "Emily's been in and out of foster homes since she was 3, each one worse than the last." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if the memories pained her. Some of these homes, they looked good on paper, but behind closed doors? She shook her head. The system failed her, over and over. Jake's fingers tightened on his handlebars. "And now she's with her father?" "Her aunt, actually. Her father shows up sometimes, usually drunk or angry." Maggie's voice trembled. "But scaring him away, it might make things worse. He might take it out on Emily later, or her aunt might send her back into the system." Jake dismounted his bike, giving Maggie his full attention. She continued, "Nobody in town knows what to do. The police have been called before, but without proof." She spread her hands helplessly. "Social services is overwhelmed. The school tries to help, but Emily barely speaks anymore. She's just retreated into herself." "How long has this been going on?" Jake asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Too long," Maggie replied. "I've been trying to help, but I'm just a volunteer. I can give her snacks, make sure she's warm when she comes here, but—" Tears welled in her eyes. "It's not enough. None of it is enough." Jake stood silent for a moment, watching Emily on the steps. The little girl hadn't moved, as if the world around her didn't exist. His chest tightened with a familiar ache, the kind that came from recognizing someone else's pain. "You think I made it worse?" he asked, quietly. Maggie touched his arm gently. "I think you meant well, Jake, but these situations, they're delicate. One wrong move, and Emily could end up somewhere even worse. Or her father might." She couldn't finish the sentence. Jake turned to face Maggie fully. In his eyes, she saw something shift, a determination that went beyond his earlier anger. "I hear you, Maggie," he said, "and I understand what you're saying, but I'm not walking away from this." "Jake," No. His voice was firm but not unkind. That little girl needs someone in her corner. Someone who won't back down, who won't give up when things get complicated. He looked back at Emily. I promise you, I'll do whatever it takes. Whatever she needs. Maggie studied his face, seeing past the tough exterior to something deeper. She recognized the look of someone who'd seen their own share of pain, someone who understood what it meant to be helpless and alone. The Iron Wolves filled every corner of Joe's bar, their leather vests and rough laughter making the regular customers shift nervously in their seats. The afternoon sun filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Jake sat at the bar, his untouched beer growing warm. "Hey, boss," one of his men called out. "About that deal in Carson City." Jake barely heard him. His mind kept drifting back to those bruises on Emily's arms, to the emptiness in her eyes. He'd seen that look before in the mirror, back when he was young and the world seemed determined to break him. "Boss?" The voice grew more insistent. "Handle it," Jake muttered, waving his hand dismissively. His gang members exchanged worried glances. It wasn't like their leader to be so distracted. The clock on the wall ticked past 4. Jake stood up suddenly, his bar stool scraping against the floor. "I'll be back," he announced, heading for the door. The afternoon heat hit him as he stepped outside, his boots heavy on the sidewalk as he walked toward the Shies Community Center. The building looked different now, quieter, almost empty. No little girl sat on the steps. Jake's heart sank, though he tried to ignore the feeling. He climbed the steps, peering through the glass doors. "She's not here." Maggie's voice came from behind him. She stood there, holding a stack of papers, her eyes tired but kind. Emily's aunt picked her up earlier. Jake's jaw tightened. Her aunt? What about her father? "He's not allowed near her anymore, thanks to you." Maggie sighed, shifting the papers in her arms. "But Jake, Emily's situation is complicated. Her aunt. She's trying, but she's barely making ends meet herself. Tell me everything," Jake demanded, his voice rough with concern. Maggie gestured to a bench nearby. As they sat, she began to unfold Emily's story. Emily lost her mother when she was 3. After that, the system took over. 4 different foster homes in 3 years. Each one, Maggie's voice cracked slightly, each one was supposed to be better than the last, but they weren't. Some were neglectful, others worse. Jake's fists clenched. And nobody did anything? People tried, but the system's overwhelmed, understaffed. Emily's just one of many kids who fall through the cracks. Her father got custody 6 months ago, promising he'd changed. Obviously, he hadn't. Maggie looked at Jake directly. Now her aunt's trying, but she works 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Emily spends most of her time alone. Jake stood up abruptly, pacing the sidewalk. His anger felt like a living thing inside his chest. "This isn't right," he growled. "She's just a kid. She deserves better than this." "Yes, she does," Maggie agreed softly. "But what can we do?" Jake stopped pacing, his expression fierce and determined. "I don't know yet, but I'm not letting her get lost in the system again. That girl's been through enough." He looked at Maggie, his eyes burning with purpose. "I promise you, Maggie, Emily won't be forgotten. Not this time. I'm going to find a way to help her heal." Maggie studied him for a long moment, seeing something in the hardened biker that gave her hope. "I believe you, Jake," she said quietly. "I really do." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Oak Ridge's streets as Jake leaned against his parked motorcycle. His eyes were fixed on the community center's entrance, watching as families came and went. He'd made it a habit to stop by, keeping a careful distance but always alert. A small figure emerged from the building, and Jake's posture straightened. Emily walked beside a thin woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her aunt, Jake presumed, matched Emily's shuffling pace with impatient steps. Emily looked different today. Her shoulders curved inward even more than usual, like she was trying to disappear into herself. The oversized sweater she wore, despite the warm weather, hung off her small frame like a shield. Jake's chest tightened at the sight. Without hesitation, he pushed off his bike and crossed the street. His heavy boots made enough noise to alert them of his approach. The aunt's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she recognized him. "Afternoon," Jake said, his voice softer than his appearance would suggest. "Emily, how are you doing?" Emily's eyes flickered up briefly before returning to the ground. Her aunt's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Can I help you?" the aunt asked, her voice as brittle as dried leaves. Jake maintained his calm demeanor, though his jaw clenched slightly. "Just checking in. I'm Jake Thornton. I've been keeping an eye out for Emily since that trouble with her father." The aunt's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's not necessary anymore. We're managing just fine." Jake studied Emily's downturned face. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her cheeks seemed hollower than before. "How's she sleeping? Eating?" he pressed, directing his questions to the aunt. "That's really none of your business," the aunt replied sharply. "We appreciate your concern, but Emily is my responsibility now." Emily flinched at her aunt's tone, a movement so slight most would miss it, but Jake noticed. He always noticed. "Ma'am," Jake said, his voice low and steady, "I know you're doing what you can, but Emily's been through a lot. Sometimes kids need more than just a roof over their heads." The aunt drew herself up, though she barely reached Jake's shoulder. "Mr. Thornton, I don't know what you think you know about our situation, but I suggest you keep your distance. Emily doesn't need any more complications in her life." Jake watched as Emily's small hand gripped the hem of her sweater, knuckles white with tension. He recognized that gesture, the silent scream of a child who'd learned that speaking up only made things worse. "Just want to make sure she's okay," Jake said, maintaining eye contact with the aunt. "She's fine," the aunt snapped. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to get home." She tugged Emily along, quickening their pace as they walked away. Jake stood rooted to the spot, watching them disappear around the corner. Emily's haunted eyes and silent distress signals played over in his mind. The aunt's defensiveness, her rigid posture, the way she'd shut down any discussion about Emily's well-being, it all added up to something that made his stomach churn. Walking back to his bike, Jake felt the weight of what he'd witnessed settle heavily on his shoulders. Emily wasn't just dealing with the aftermath of her father's abuse, she was still trapped in a cycle of neglect, just wearing a different face. The realization that he might be the only one who truly saw how broken she was made his chest ache. The morning sun cast long shadows across Oak Ridge's main street as Jake cruised on his Harley, the engine's rumble echoing off storefronts. He'd been riding around town for hours, watching, listening, trying to piece together Emily's story. His leather jacket couldn't keep out the chill that settled in his bones every time he thought about her blank stare. The bell above Mary's diner chimed as Jake pushed through the door. The usual breakfast crowd turned to look, then quickly went back to their coffee and eggs. He slid into a booth near the back, close to where a group of mothers sat, chattering over their morning coffee. "2 eggs over easy and black coffee," he told Sally, the waitress who approached his table with practiced caution. As she walked away, fragments of conversation from the nearby booth drifted over. "Did you hear about that foster family on Maple Street?" one woman whispered, not quite quietly enough. "The ones who had that little girl before she went to live with her aunt?" Jake's shoulders tensed. He pretended to study the menu while straining to hear more. "Oh, the O'Connors. Terrible situation," another woman replied, shaking her head. "That poor child. They seemed like such a nice family at first." "That's the problem with the system here," a third woman added, stirring her coffee. They're so desperate for foster families, they'll take anyone who passes the basic checks. Remember what happened with the Petersons last year? At least the Petersons just neglected their foster kids, the first woman said. The O'Connors, well, I heard things. Things that make my skin crawl. Jake's coffee arrived, but he barely noticed. His knuckles were white around the mug. My Susan used to try talking to that little girl at school, one of them continued. Said she never spoke, just sat alone at lunch. Always wore long sleeves, even in summer. The aunt's not much better, someone added. Works nights, leaves the girl alone most of the time. But what can you expect? She didn't ask for this responsibility. Jake had heard enough. He left some money on the table and walked out, his breakfast untouched. His mind raced as he rode to the community center, where he found Maggie sorting through donation boxes. Maggie, he called out, his voice rough. We need to talk about Emily. She looked up, reading the concern on his face. What happened? Been listening around town, Jake said, pulling up a chair. The O'Connors, her last foster family. What do you know about them? Maggie's hands stilled over the box of clothes she was sorting. Nothing good, she admitted quietly. Emily was with them for 8 months. When she left, she stopped speaking entirely for weeks. And nobody did anything? Jake's voice rose with anger. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, Emily was already moved to her aunt's, Maggie explained. The system's broken, Jake. Good intentions, but not enough resources, not enough oversight. Jake ran a hand over his face. She needs more than good intentions, Maggie. She needs someone who'll actually protect her. I know, Maggie said softly. But it has to be done right. We can't just sweep in and fix everything with force. That'll only make things worse for her. Jake nodded slowly, his jaw set with determination. Then, we'll do it right. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, Maggie agreed, meeting his gaze with equal resolve. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Oak Ridge's worn streets as Jake guided his motorcycle through the quieter part of town. The houses here had seen better days. Peeling paint, sagging porches, and overgrown lawns told stories of struggle and hard times. He slowed his bike as he approached Emily's aunt's house, the engine's rumble dropping to a low purr. The small, weathered house matched its neighbors in neglect. The white paint had faded to a dull gray, and loose shingles clung precariously to the roof. Dead flowers filled the concrete planters that lined the cracked walkway. The screen door hung slightly askew, its mesh torn in places. Jake cut the engine and swung his leg over his bike, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway. His eyes scanned the property, taking in every detail. No car in the driveway, no lights on inside, but there, on the front porch, sat Emily. She perched on the top step, her small frame almost lost in another oversized sweater despite the warm weather. Her eyes were fixed on some distant point, unseeing, her face a mask of quiet resignation that no 6-year-old should wear. She didn't react to his approach, though he knew she must have heard his motorcycle. "Hey, kid," Jake said softly, keeping his voice gentle. He waited at the bottom of the steps, giving her space. "Your aunt around?" Emily shook her head slightly, still not looking at him. "Mind if I sit with you for a bit?" Another small head shake, this time accompanied by the tiniest shift to the side, making room on the step. Jake moved slowly, settling his large frame beside her with care. The old wood creaked under his weight. They sat in silence for a while, watching the shadows stretch longer across the patchy lawn. A warm breeze rustled through the overgrown bushes, carrying the scent of wild honeysuckle from somewhere nearby. "You know," Jake said finally, his rough voice unusually soft, "I used to sit on porches like this when I was about your age, just watching the world go by." Emily's hands twisted slightly in her lap, but she remained quiet. "What was it like?" Jake asked carefully. Before all this? Before the foster homes? Emily's shoulders tensed slightly. Her fingers clutched at the hem of her sweater, pulling it tighter around herself like armor. But something flickered in her eyes. A spark of memory, perhaps, or emotion breaking through her carefully constructed walls. "I had a cat," she whispered, so quietly Jake had to lean in slightly to hear. "Orange. Named him Sonny." Jake nodded, encouraging but not pushing. "That's a good name for an orange cat. Mom helped me pick it." Her voice wavered slightly on the word mom. Jake felt something tighten in his chest. He turned slightly toward her, his leather jacket creaking with the movement. "Emily," he said, making sure his voice carried all the certainty he felt. "I want you to know something. You can trust me. I promise you. No one's going to hurt you again. Not while I'm around." For the first time, Emily turned her head slightly toward him. Her eyes met his briefly, searching for something in his face. Whatever she saw there made her nod, just once, before returning her gaze to the distance. But something had shifted in the air between them, like the first crack in a wall of ice, small but significant. The evening sun cast long shadows across the worn porch steps as Jake knocked on Emily's aunt's door. His knuckles rapped against the peeling paint, each knock echoing his determination. The door creaked open, revealing Emily's aunt, her thin frame tensing at the sight of him. "Mrs. Harrison," Jake said, keeping his voice level despite the anger simmering beneath. "We need to talk about Emily." She glanced nervously over her shoulder into the dark house. "This isn't a good time." "It never is." Jake planted his boot in the doorway before she could close it. "But we're going to have this conversation now." Mrs. Harrison's shoulders slumped in defeat, and she stepped back, allowing Jake to enter the cramped living room. Old newspapers cluttered the coffee table, and the musty smell of cigarettes hung in the air. Jake remained standing, his presence filling the small space. "I know about Emily's situation," he said, watching the aunt sink into a worn armchair. "I know about the foster homes, the abuse, everything." Mrs. Harrison's hands twisted in her lap. "You don't understand how difficult it's been. I'm doing the best I can." "Are you?" Jake's voice hardened. "Because from where I'm standing, that little girl needs more than just a roof over her head. She needs someone who'll actually care for her." "And you think you know what's best?" Mrs. Harrison's voice cracked with frustration. "I took her in when nobody else would. Do you know how hard it is to raise a child like her? She barely speaks, barely eats. I don't know what to do with her." Jake leaned forward, his shadow falling across the aunt's face. "Then let me make this simple for you. Either you step up and give Emily the care she deserves, or we'll find someone who will." "Are you threatening me?" Mrs. Harrison's voice trembled. "I'm telling you how it's going to be." Jake's tone left no room for argument. "That girl deserves better than what she's gotten so far. Better than what you're giving her now." Mrs. Harrison's face crumpled. "I never wanted any of this. Her mother, my sister, she just left her. What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to protect her," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "But if you can't do that, if you're not up for it, then Emily needs to be somewhere else, with people who can give her what she needs." The aunt wiped at her eyes with shaking hands. "And who decides that? You? If I have to." Jake straightened up, towering over her. "I'm giving you one chance to make this right. One chance to show that you can be what Emily needs. But if I see any sign at all, that she's not being cared for properly, I'll make sure she's placed somewhere else." Mrs. Harrison stared at him, her face pale. "You don't have that kind of power." "Try me." Jake turned toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "I'll be watching, and I won't let her down again." As he walked back to his motorcycle, Jake couldn't shake the image of Emily's sad face from his mind. The emptiness in her eyes haunted him, reminding him of all the times the system had failed her. His jaw clenched as he swung his leg over his bike. The aunt's defeated expression told him everything he needed to know. This battle was far from over. Jake was cleaning his motorcycle outside the bar when his phone rang. The sound cut through the peaceful morning air, making him frown. He rarely got calls this early. Wiping his hands on a rag, he pulled the phone from his leather vest. "Yeah?" he answered gruffly. "Jake, it's Maggie." Her voice trembled. "You need to come to the community center right away." Something in her tone made his chest tighten. "What's wrong?" "It's about Emily." Jake was on his bike before Maggie finished speaking. The engine roared to life, and he sped through Oak Ridge's quiet streets, ignoring the surprised looks from people opening their shops for the day. The community center's parking lot was nearly empty when he arrived. Maggie stood at the entrance, wringing her hands. Her usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by obvious distress. "Emily's aunt called this morning," Maggie said as Jake approached. "She's sending Emily to another foster home." Jake's stomach clenched. "Where?" "Someplace 3 counties over." Maggie's voice cracked. "I made some calls. Jake, it's not good. The home has a history of complaints, overcrowding, neglect." She shook her head, unable to continue. Jake's hands balled into fists. "When?" "End of the week." Maggie led him inside to her small office. Papers were scattered across her desk. Records, forms, notes she'd taken during her calls. "The aunt says she can't handle Emily anymore. Says the girl is too withdrawn, too difficult." "Too difficult?" Jake's voice was dangerously low. He thought about Emily, so small and quiet, trying her best to disappear from a world that had hurt her too many times. "That's bull, and you know it." Maggie sank into her chair. "The aunt's made up her mind. She's already signed the transfer papers." Jake paced the small office, his heavy boots echoing against the linoleum floor. "There has to be something we can do, some way to stop this." "Legally, our hands are tied." Maggie shuffled through the papers. "The aunt is her legal guardian. She has the right to make these decisions." "To hell with legal," Jake growled. "We both know what happens in homes like that. Emily deserves better." Maggie looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "I've watched that girl struggle for months. Every time she starts to feel safe, something like this happens. I don't think she can take another move, Jake. Not to a place like this." Jake stopped pacing. He braced his hands on Maggie's desk, leaning forward. "Then we don't let it happen." "What are you thinking?" "I don't know yet." Jake's mind raced through possibilities. "But I'm not letting that girl disappear into another broken home. She's been through enough." Maggie stood up, determination replacing her distress. "Whatever you're planning, I want to help. Emily needs people in her corner for once." Jake nodded, his jaw set. "We've got 3 days. I'll figure something out." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Maggie, thank you for calling me. Just," Maggie's voice was soft, "just make sure we do this right, Jake. For Emily's sake." Jake's motorcycle rumbled to a stop in front of a shabby 2-story house. Paint peeled from the walls like dead skin, and the front yard was nothing but patches of dirt and weeds. The porch sagged under the weight of broken furniture and trash bags. His jaw clenched as he climbed off his bike. This was Emily's new home. The word felt wrong even thinking it. The screen door creaked as he knocked. A thin woman with tired eyes and messy hair answered. She looked Jake up and down, taking in his leather vest and the patches that marked him as the Iron Wolves' leader. "What do you want?" Her voice was flat, uninterested. "I'm here to see Emily." Jake kept his voice level, though his hands had balled into fists at his sides. A man appeared behind her, beer can in hand. "Who's asking?" "Name's Jake Thornton." He stepped forward, using his height to his advantage. "I hear you're her new foster parents." The woman shrugged and walked away, leaving the door open. Jake followed them inside, his boots heavy on the creaking floor. The house smelled of stale cigarettes and neglect. Empty beer cans littered the coffee table, and the TV blared in the background. In the corner of the living room sat Emily, her small frame pressed against the wall. Her backpack was clutched tightly to her chest like a shield. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, that same blank expression he'd seen too many times before, masking whatever she felt inside. Jake's blood began to boil. He'd seen enough foster homes like this, places where kids were nothing but meal tickets, where love and care were as absent as proper meals and clean clothes. "Emily," he said softly. Her eyes flickered up briefly, then back down. The foster father dropped heavily onto a worn recliner. "Look, if you're from social services or whatever, we got all the paperwork. Kid's fine here." Jake turned slowly, his voice dangerously quiet. "Fine? You call this fine?" The woman lit a cigarette, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. "She's got a roof over her head, doesn't she? Food in her belly? What more you want?" "What I want," Jake said, each word precise and sharp, "is for Emily to come with me. Right now." The couple exchanged looks. The man stood up, trying to match Jake's intimidating presence but falling short. "You can't just walk in here and—" "I can," Jake cut him off. "And I will. You want to know why?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "Because I've seen your type before. You take these kids in for the check, but you don't give a damn about them. And if I ever hear that you've hurt any child placed in your care, I'll make sure you face consequences that'll make you wish you'd never signed up to be foster parents." The threat hung in the air, like the cigarette smoke. The woman's hand trembled as she took another drag. The man's face had gone pale. Jake turned to Emily, his voice softening. "Come on, sweetheart. You're coming with me." Emily looked up, confusion flickering across her face. But there was something else there, too, a tiny spark of hope. She stood slowly, her backpack still, hugged tight against her chest. "You can't just take her," the foster mother protested weakly. Jake fixed her with a cold stare. "Watch me." He placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "Let's go, kiddo." Emily followed him silently out the door, down the creaking steps, and toward his motorcycle. She didn't look back once at the house or the couple standing in the doorway. Neither did Jake. Jake's motorcycle thundered down Main Street, Emily's small arms wrapped tightly around his waist. The leather of his vest was cool against her hands, and he could feel her trembling slightly. He hadn't planned on taking her from the foster home like this, but seeing her there, so lost and broken, had pushed him over the edge. The Iron Wolves clubhouse came into view, a weathered building with motorcycles lined up outside. Jake pulled up slowly, cutting the engine. "It's okay, Emily. These are good people. No one's gonna hurt you here." Emily nodded but didn't speak. Her eyes darted around, taking in every detail of her surroundings like a frightened animal seeking escape routes. Inside, the usual rowdy atmosphere of the clubhouse died down as Jake entered with Emily. The gang members, tough as they were, seemed to soften at the sight of the small girl. Jake led her to a worn leather couch in the corner, away from the crowd. "Stay here for a minute," he said gently. "I need to make a phone call." Jake stepped into his office, a small room cluttered with paperwork and old photographs. His hands shook slightly as he dialed the number. It had been years since he'd called in a favor from Marcus, his old army buddy who now worked in social services. "Marcus? It's Jake Thornton." He cleared his throat. "Listen, I need your help with something important." The conversation was long and complicated. Marcus listened patiently as Jake explained Emily's situation, the abuse, the neglect, the system's failures. "There's got to be something we can do." Jake insisted, his voice growing hoarse. We can't let her go back to another bad situation. Jake, I understand, Marcus replied, his voice tinged with sympathy and frustration. But there are protocols, paperwork. Even with my help, it could take weeks to process a new placement. Jake's free hand clenched into a fist. Weeks? She needs help now, Marcus. I'll do what I can to expedite things, Marcus promised. But you need to bring her back to her current placement. Taking her like this, it could make things worse. Jake glanced through the doorway at Emily, who sat perfectly still on the couch, her small hands folded in her lap. One of the gang members had brought her a glass of water, but it remained untouched. Just tell me what I need to do, Jake said, running a hand through his graying hair. Whatever paperwork, whatever hoops I need to jump through, Marcus sighed. I'll start the process, but Jake, this isn't like the old days. We can't just charge in and fix things with brute force. After hanging up, Jake returned to the main room. Emily hadn't moved an inch, but her eyes followed him as he approached. He sat down beside her, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. Minutes ticked by slowly. The usual noise of the clubhouse seemed muted, as if everyone understood the gravity of the situation. Jake checked his phone repeatedly, willing it to ring with news from Marcus. Emily's small voice broke the silence. Are they going to send me back? Jake looked at her, seeing all the pain and fear she carried. The system that was supposed to protect her had failed her at every turn. Now here he was, a man who'd spent his life operating outside the law, trying to work within it to save her. His frustration built with each passing moment. The bureaucracy, the red tape, the endless waiting, it all felt like a wall between Emily and the safety she desperately needed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the cramped office of Oak Ridge's Child Services building. Jake sat uncomfortably in a small chair, his leather vest and intimidating frame looking out of place among the filing cabinets and motivational posters. Beside him, Maggie's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the social worker across the desk. I understand your concerns, the social worker said, shuffling through Emily's thick case file. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed countless sleepless nights spent worrying about children just like Emily. But our hands are tied by regulations and protocols. Jake leaned forward, his voice low but intense. You've seen her file. You know what she's been through. How many more homes does she have to bounce through before someone actually helps her? The social worker sighed, removing her glasses to rub her tired eyes. Mr. Thornton, believe me, I want to help. Emily's case keeps me up at night, but we have to work within the system. There are procedures, background checks, home studies. The system? Jake's voice rose slightly. The system is what got her here in the first place. The system is what keeps sending her back to people who hurt her. Maggie placed a gentle hand on Jake's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. We're not trying to bypass the proper channels, she explained to the social worker. We just want to make sure Emily gets the care she needs this time. The social worker nodded sympathetically. I know. But even with documented abuse, moving a child is complicated. We need proper placement options, court orders. She spread her hands helplessly. The waiting lists for good foster homes are months long. Jake stood up abruptly, pacing the small office. Months? She needs help now. Today. There might be another way, Maggie said slowly, her eyes lighting up with an idea. What if we got the community involved? People here know Emily. They've seen what she's going through. If we could find a local family willing to foster her, someone who already knows her situation. The social worker straightened in her chair, looking interested for the first time. Community support would make a difference. If we had local families willing to go through the proper certification process, I'll make it happen, Jake said firmly. his determination evident in every word. Whatever it takes, whatever hoops we need to jump through, Emily deserves better than what she's gotten so far. Maggie stood up too, her enthusiasm growing. Oak Ridge is a small town. People talk, they care. They might be scared of you, Jake, but they've seen how you're trying to help Emily. If we can show them there's a way to make a difference. The social worker pulled out some forms from her desk. I can provide information about becoming foster parents. The process isn't quick, but with enough local support. She handed the papers to Maggie. Maybe we can make something happen. Jake took a deep breath, his massive frame blocking the afternoon light from the window. I'm not giving up on her. If the system won't help, we'll find people who will. As they left the office, Maggie was already making plans. We can start with the church group, then the PTA. Sarah at the diner knows everyone in town. If we can get her on board. She looked up at Jake. People will help if we show them how. Walking through Oak Ridge's quiet streets, they could see curious faces peering out of shop windows. The town that had once feared Jake's presence was starting to see him differently. One by one, doors began to open. A shopkeeper waved hesitantly. A teacher from the elementary school crossed the street to speak with Maggie. The whispers were changing. Instead of fear, there was curiosity. Instead of judgment, there was concern. Oak Ridge was waking up to Emily's story, and its people were ready to help. The afternoon sun beat down on Oak Ridge's main street as Jake pulled up to Emily's father's house. The rumble of his motorcycle cut through the quiet neighborhood, like thunder before a storm. He'd gotten word that Emily's father was back in town, throwing his weight around and making threats about taking Emily back. Jake killed the engine and dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway. The house looked worse than before. Beer cans littered the front yard, and the screen door hung crooked on its hinges. The place reeked of neglect. Emily's father stepped out onto the porch, his face twisted with anger. "What do you want now, Slick?" he spat, gripping the porch railing. "Come to threaten me again?" Jake's jaw tightened. "I told you to stay away." His voice was low and dangerous. "But here you are, making trouble." "She's my daughter," Emily's father shouted, his face reddening. "You got no right to keep her from me. Blood means something." "Blood?" Jake's laugh was cold. "Blood means nothing when you use it to hurt a child. Those bruises on her arms, that was blood too, wasn't it?" Emily's father stormed down the porch steps, getting in Jake's face. His breath reeked of alcohol. "You don't know anything about me or my kid. Who do you think you are? Some kind of hero? You're just a thug on a bike." Jake didn't flinch. "Maybe I am, but at least I'm not the one who beats on little girls." The first punch came fast, but Jake was ready for it. He dodged, letting Emily's father stumble past him. The man wheeled around, face contorted with rage. "I'm taking her back," he snarled, "and there's nothing you can do about it." "Wrong answer." Jake's voice was steel. Emily's father charged again, but this time Jake stood his ground. The two men grappled, neither willing to give an inch. Jake could feel the desperation in the other man's movements, the wild, uncontrolled fury of someone who knew they were losing. The sound of motorcycles filled the air. One by one, members of the Iron Wolves pulled up, forming a semicircle around the fighting men. Their presence was like a physical force, pressing in on all sides. Emily's father froze, his eyes darting between the bikers. The fight drained from him as he realized he was outnumbered. Jake stepped back, straightening his jacket. "This is your last warning," Jake said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Stay away from Emily. You've done enough damage." The man's shoulders slumped, defeat written across his face. He looked at the circle of stern faces surrounding him, then back at Jake. "You can't keep her from me forever," he muttered. But the threat in his voice had turned hollow. "Watch me." Jake replied. Emily's father retreated to his porch, slamming the door behind him. Jake turned to his gang, nodding in silent thanks. They understood. This wasn't just about one man anymore. This was about protecting someone who couldn't protect herself. Jake slumped in the plastic chair at the community center, his leather jacket creaking as he shifted. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making the dark circles under his eyes more prominent. The confrontation with Emily's father had drained him, but he couldn't rest. Not yet. The social worker, Mrs. Peterson, sat across from him, her hands folded neatly on a stack of papers. "I have some news about Emily," she said, her voice careful and measured. "A family has expressed interest in taking her in." Jake straightened, hope flickering in his tired eyes. "That's good, right?" "They're a wonderful couple," Mrs. Peterson continued. "Both teachers. They've fostered several children before, and they have an excellent track record." She paused, shuffling through her papers. "They live in Burlington, about 3 hours from here." The hope in Jake's chest turned to lead. 3 hours? "I know it's not ideal," Mrs. Peterson said, "but finding a stable, experienced foster family isn't easy. These people have the resources and experience to help Emily heal." Jake stood up and paced the small office, his boots scuffing against the linoleum floor. "She's just starting to feel safe here. She trusts me. Trusts Maggie. And now you want to ship her off to strangers?" "Jake?" Maggie's voice came from the doorway. She'd been listening. "Maybe we should hear more about this family." "You can't be serious." Jake turned to her, disbelief written across his face. "After everything we've done to help her feel secure?" Maggie stepped into the office, her usually gentle expression hardened with determination. "We need to think about what's best for Emily long term. These people sound like they know what they're doing." "What's best for her?" Jake's voice rose slightly. "What's best is consistency. People who care about her. She has that here." "And what happens when your gang moves on?" Maggie challenged. "What happens when the next crisis hits town and you're not here?" "Emily needs stability, Jake. Real, long-term stability." Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "I'm not going anywhere. I made her a promise." "You can't guarantee that," Maggie said softly. "None of us can." Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat. "The family has invited us to visit. They'd like to meet Emily, and they're open to maintaining connections here in Oak Ridge if things work out." Jake stared out the window, watching as leaves skittered across the community center's parking lot. The thought of Emily leaving made his chest tight, but Maggie's words had hit home. Was he being selfish, wanting to keep her close? "Fine," he said finally, turning back to face them. "I'll go see these people myself. I need to know who they are, what kind of home they're offering." His voice grew firm. "But I'm not just going to hand her over without making sure it's right." "Jake?" Maggie started to protest. "No," he cut her off. "You want me to think about what's best for Emily? This is me doing that. I'm going to meet them, see their home, understand their intentions." He looked at Mrs. Peterson. "Set it up." The social worker nodded, relief visible on her face. "I'll make the arrangements." Maggie stepped closer to Jake, her voice low and urgent. "You can't keep fighting every decision that involves letting her go." Jake's jaw tightened. "Watch me. I'm not letting her down like everyone else has." Jake's motorcycle rumbled to a stop in front of a 2-story house with cream-colored siding and perfectly trimmed hedges. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, exactly the kind of place a child should grow up. Red and yellow flowers lined the walkway, and a wooden swing hung from a sturdy oak tree in the front yard. He took off his helmet and ran a hand through his graying hair. The house looked like something out of a magazine, almost too perfect. A woman with kind eyes and graying hair stepped onto the porch, waving at him. "Mr. Thornton? I'm Sarah Miller." Please, come in." Jake nodded, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. Inside, the house smelled like fresh-baked cookies and furniture polish. Everything was in its place. Family photos on the walls, throw pillows arranged just so on the couch, educational toys neatly organized in baskets. "My husband Tom will be home soon," Sarah said, leading Jake to the kitchen. "Would you like some coffee?" "Sure," Jake replied, settling onto a bar stool at the granite counter. His leather vest and rough appearance seemed out of place in the spotless kitchen. Sarah poured coffee into a delicate china cup. "We've been foster parents for 15 years, she explained, sliding the cup toward him. "We've helped dozens of children find their way." Jake wrapped his calloused hands around the cup. "Tell me about them." Sarah's face lit up as she talked about the children they'd fostered, their successes, their struggles, their transformations. Everything she said was right. They were experienced, patient, understanding. "We have a room all ready for Emily," Sarah said, gesturing for Jake to follow her upstairs. The bedroom was painted soft purple, with white curtains floating in the breeze from an open window. A handmade quilt covered the bed, and a wooden bookshelf held dozens of children's books. "It's nice," Jake said, his voice rough. And it was more than nice. It was perfect. But something nagged at him. He watched as Sarah straightened an already straight picture frame, adjusted an already centered teddy bear. Everything was too neat, too organized, too perfect. Tom arrived home while they were still upstairs. He was wearing a sweater vest and khakis, his smile as polished as the hardwood floors. They discussed Emily's case, her needs, their experience with trauma cases. "We understand she's been through a lot," Tom said, his voice gentle. "We'll give her all the time she needs to adjust." Jake nodded, studying the couple. They were good people. Anyone could see that. They had the experience, the resources, the stable home Emily deserved. But as they talked about their structured routines and careful systems, Jake felt the unease growing in his gut. Emily wasn't a system. She wasn't a problem to be solved with schedules and strategies. She was a wounded soul who needed something raw and real, someone who understood the kind of pain that couldn't be fixed with perfect rooms and organized toy boxes. "We'll take good care of her," Sarah assured him, walking him to the door. "She'll have everything she needs here." Jake paused on the porch, looking back at the immaculate house and the smiling couple. "I'll bring her by in the morning," he said finally, to see how she feels about it. But as he walked back to his motorcycle, the weight in his chest grew heavier. The Millers were good people, but they didn't understand Emily's darkness. They couldn't see the shadows in her eyes or feel the tremors in her silence. They wanted to fix her, but Emily didn't need fixing. She needed someone who could sit with her in her brokenness and show her it was okay to be imperfect. Jake swung his leg over his bike, his promise to return tomorrow feeling hollow in his throat. Jake's boots echoed through the dimly lit bar as he pushed through the heavy wooden door. The usual crowd of bikers parted to let him through, sensing the weight of his thoughts. His phone buzzed in his pocket, another message from the social worker about Emily's placement. "Good news," the text read. "The family's ready to take her. We can arrange the transfer tomorrow." Jake slumped onto a bar stool, running his weathered hands through his graying hair. The words should have brought relief, but something felt off. He ordered a coffee, ignoring the questioning looks from his gang members who were used to seeing him with something stronger. "Hey, Slick," one of his riders called out. "Everything okay with the kid?" Jake nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. The coffee arrived, steam rising in lazy spirals. He needed to see Emily to make sure this was right. The community center was quiet when he arrived. Emily sat in her usual spot on the steps, her small frame hunched over a worn coloring book. Maggie stood nearby, watching with concern in her eyes. "Hey, kiddo," Jake said softly, lowering himself onto the step beside her. "Got some news for you." Emily's crayon stopped moving, but she didn't look up. Her shoulders tensed slightly, a reaction Jake had learned to recognize when she was afraid. "The new family? They want to take you in," he continued, trying to keep his voice gentle. "They've got a nice house, with a big yard, even have a dog." Emily's fingers tightened around the crayon until her knuckles turned white. She remained silent, but Jake could feel the anxiety radiating from her tiny frame. "You don't want to go, do you?" he asked quietly. Emily shook her head, so slightly he almost missed it. A tear splashed onto her coloring book, creating a dark circle on the page. "They're good people," Jake tried, but the words felt hollow. "They'll take care of you. That's what they always say," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. It was the most she'd spoken in days. Jake's heart clenched. He thought about all the homes Emily had been through, all the promises that had been broken. He remembered the bruises, the fear in her eyes, the way she flinched at sudden movements. Maggie stepped closer, her face etched with concern. "Jake, maybe we should—" "No." Jake cut her off, standing up. His decision crystallized in that moment, clear as day. "We're not doing this to her again." Emily looked up at him then, her eyes wide and questioning. There was a flicker of something there, hope, maybe, or trust. It was enough to strengthen his resolve. Jake said firmly, "We'll figure something else out, something better." The tension in Emily's shoulders eased slightly. She didn't smile, she rarely did, but some of the fear seemed to leave her face. Jake pulled out his phone and deleted the social worker's message. He knew this wouldn't be easy. The system was broken, and fixing it would take more than just good intentions. But looking at Emily, seeing that tiny spark of trust in her eyes, he knew he couldn't give up. The sun was setting over Oak Ridge, casting long shadows across the community center steps. Jake sat back down beside Emily, watching as she carefully returned to her coloring. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He would keep fighting for her, no matter what it took. Jake sat in his worn leather chair at the Iron Wolves clubhouse, his phone pressed against his ear. The late afternoon sun filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the empty room. He'd chosen this quiet moment deliberately. This call was too important for distractions. "Miss Reynolds," he said into the phone, his voice firm but respectful, "I need to talk to you about Emily." The social worker on the other end sighed. "Mr. Thornton, we've been through this. The new family." "Listen," Jake cut in, leaning forward in his chair. "I know a family here in Oak Ridge. Good people. They're willing to take Emily in." He could hear papers shuffling on the other end of the line. "Mr. Thornton, placing a child isn't as simple as finding willing parents. There are procedures, evaluations." "I understand that," Jake said, running a hand through his graying hair. "But Emily needs stability right now, not another move across the state. She's finally starting to feel safe here." The social worker went quiet for a moment. Jake pressed on, his voice softening. "You've seen her file. You know what she's been through. Every time we move her, we're just adding to that trauma. The family I'm talking about, they're solid. Martha and John Peterson. He's a contractor. She runs the bookstore downtown. They've been trying to adopt for years." Jake stood up and paced the room, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. "They've got a good home, steady income. More importantly, they understand what Emily's been through. They're willing to give her all the time and space she needs to heal." "The Petersons?" Miss Reynolds sounded surprised. "I know them. They did apply to be foster parents a while back." "Exactly," Jake said, stopping by the window. He watched a group of kids riding their bikes down the street, carefree and happy. That's what Emily deserved, a chance at a normal childhood. They know the system, they've done the training, they just need your support to make this happen. "Mr. Thornton," Miss Reynolds began, her tone professional but gentler now, I appreciate what you're trying to do for Emily. But you have to understand, even if the Petersons are suitable, there's paperwork, home studies, background checks. Then let's start now, Jake insisted. Today, I'll do whatever it takes to help move this along. But I'm telling you, sending her away from Oak Ridge isn't the answer. She needs to stay here, where people know her, where she's starting to build trust. He heard Miss Reynolds tap her pen against her desk, a habit he'd noticed during their previous meetings. You really care about what happens to her, don't you? More than I expected to, Jake admitted, his voice rough with emotion. That girl's been through hell, and she's still standing. She deserves a chance at a real home, with people who'll fight for her. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Miss Reynolds spoke. All right, Mr. Thornton. I'll look into the Peterson situation. I can't make any promises, but I'll investigate this option before we move forward with the out-of-town placement. Jake's shoulders relaxed slightly. That's all I'm asking. Just give them a chance. Give Emily a chance to stay where she feels safe. I'll need to make some calls, Miss Reynolds said. This could take some time to sort out. I understand, Jake replied, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. Thank you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Oak Ridge as Jake paced outside the social services office. Inside, the Hendersons, a local couple known for their work with troubled youth, sat with the social worker, their folder of paperwork thick with references and background checks. Mrs. Henderson taught at the local elementary school, and her husband ran the youth sports program at the community center. They had 3 children of their own, but their house felt empty since their oldest left for college. More importantly, they understood trauma and had experience helping children heal. The Hendersons have an excellent record, the social worker said, flipping through their file. And the community support is remarkable. She gestured to the stack of letters on her desk, testimonials from teachers, church members, and local business owners, all vouching for the couple. Jake watched through the window as Mr. Henderson spoke passionately about their plans for Emily. They had already prepared a room, bought new clothes, and arranged for therapy sessions. Their youngest daughter, Sarah, had even given up her craft room to make space for Emily. Maggie appeared beside Jake, coffee in hand. The whole town's been talking about nothing else, she said, passing him a cup. Even old Mrs. Wilson from the bakery wrote a letter. Says she'll make sure Emily gets a fresh muffin every morning on her way to school. Jake nodded, his throat tight. The support had been overwhelming. Once word got out about Emily's situation, the town had rallied in ways he never expected. The same people who used to cross the street when they saw him coming now stopped to ask how they could help. Inside the office, Emily sat quietly between the Hendersons, her small hands folded in her lap. But there was something different about her today, a tiny spark in her eyes that Jake hadn't seen before. When Mrs. Henderson gently touched her shoulder, Emily didn't flinch away. The social worker continued reviewing documents, occasionally nodding. The proximity to Emily's current support system is a significant factor, she said, and having Mr. Thornton and Miss Callahan nearby. She glanced out the window, meeting Jake's eyes. Well, it's clear they've become important figures in Emily's life. The meeting stretched on for another hour. Jake and Maggie waited, watching as more people from town stopped by to show their support. The hardware store owner brought photos of the bedroom set he'd donated. The librarian delivered a box of books she'd carefully selected for Emily. Finally, the office door opened. The social worker emerged with a slight smile, and Jake's heart skipped a beat. The Hendersons followed, beaming, with Emily between them. For the first time since Jake had known her, Emily was almost smiling. The placement is approved, the social worker announced. We'll have a 6-month probationary period, with regular check-ins. But, she looked at Emily, her expression softening. I think we've found the right fit. 2 weeks later, Jake stood, outside the community center, watching Emily play tag with her new foster siblings. Her laughter, a sound he'd never heard before, rang across the playground. She was wearing a new blue dress, her hair neatly braided by Mrs. Henderson, and she moved with an energy that made her seem like a different child. Maggie joined him, leaning against the wall. Neither spoke for a long moment, both lost in the simple joy of watching Emily run and play like any other child. The bruises had faded, and though the emotional scars would take longer to heal, Jake could see the difference in her already. "She's going to be okay," Maggie said softly, her voice full of quiet certainty. Jake nodded, feeling something loosen in his chest, a knot of worry he'd carried since that first day he'd seen her on these very steps. Jake leaned against his motorcycle, watching Emily play in the community center's yard. The autumn breeze rustled through the leaves, and sunlight dappled the ground where she sat with her new foster siblings. Her small hands carefully arranged colored blocks into patterns, something he'd never seen her do before. "She's different now," Maggie said, appearing beside him. "You can see it in her eyes." Jake nodded, not taking his gaze off Emily. The bruises had faded completely, and her oversized clothes had been replaced with new ones that actually fit. Her hair was neatly braided, and though she didn't smile much, her face had lost that haunted look he'd first noticed on the community center steps. "The Hendersons are good people," he said gruffly. "They know what they're doing with foster kids." Mrs. Henderson sat nearby on a wooden bench, keeping a watchful eye on the children while giving them space to play. She had a gentle way about her that seemed to put Emily at ease. Mr. Henderson had already built Emily a small bookshelf in her new room, filling it with stories she could read when she needed quiet time. A small commotion drew Jake's attention as Emily's foster brother accidentally knocked over her block tower. Jake tensed, expecting the worst, but Emily didn't flinch or withdraw like she used to. Instead, she simply started rebuilding, and after a moment, her foster brother joined in to help. "That right there," Maggie whispered. "That's what healing looks like." The town had changed, too. People who once crossed the street to avoid Jake now nodded in greeting. The suspicious glares had been replaced with something like respect. Even old Mrs. Wilson from the bakery had started saving day-old cookies for his gang members when they rolled through town. Emily looked up from her blocks, catching Jake's eye. She didn't smile, not yet, but she held his gaze for a long moment before returning to her play. It was a small gesture, but Jake felt it in his chest like a physical thing. "The whole town's talking about the celebration tomorrow," Maggie said. "Everyone's bringing something. Even Mayor Thompson is coming." Jake grunted. The idea of a community celebration for Emily still felt strange to him. These same people had looked the other way for so long. But then again, maybe that's what change looked like, people waking up, doing better, making amends. He watched as Mrs. Henderson gathered the children for snack time. Emily walked beside her new foster mother, not quite holding her hand but staying close. She sat at the picnic table with the other kids, accepting a juice box and some apple slices. Her movements were still careful, still guarded, but there was a new steadiness to her that hadn't been there before. "You did this," Maggie said softly. "You saw her when nobody else would." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "The Hendersons did this. The social workers. You! I just made some noise." "You made people care," Maggie corrected him. "You showed this town what it means to stand up for someone who needs help." Emily finished her snack and returned to her blocks, this time building something taller. Siblings gathered around, offering suggestions and helping her place each piece. When the tower wobbled, they all held their breath, but it stayed standing, reaching toward the sky like a tiny triumph. Jake watched it all, his heart full of an unfamiliar feeling. It wasn't just pride. It was something bigger, something that felt like hope. Emily was going to be okay. She had found her place, her people, her chance to heal. Jake sat at his usual spot in the dimly lit bar, nursing a glass of water. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. His weathered hands held a crisp white envelope, the edges already softened from being handled so many times throughout the day. The letter had arrived that morning, bearing the return address of Emily's new foster family. He'd been carrying it around all day, reading it over and over until the words were etched in his memory. "Dear Jake," he mouthed the words silently as his eyes traced the neat handwriting. "We wanted to write and thank you for everything you've done for Emily. When she first came to us, she barely spoke, barely smiled. But yesterday, she laughed. Really laughed. It was while she was playing with our other kids in the backyard. The sound was so pure, so unexpected, that I had to stop what I was doing just to listen." Jake's throat tightened. He took a slow sip of water, letting the words sink in. The letter went on to describe Emily's progress, how she'd started drawing pictures at school, how she was slowly opening up to her teachers, how she'd finally begun to sleep through the night without nightmares. "She talks about you sometimes," the letter continued. "She calls you her guardian angel, though she says it very quietly, like it's a secret she's not sure she should share. Yesterday, she asked if you could come to her school play next month. We'd love to have you there, if you're willing." The tough biker ran his calloused thumb over the prost paper, remembering the scared little girl he'd first seen on those community center steps. Her hollow eyes, the bruises on her arms, the way she'd flinched at any sudden movement. The transformation described in this letter seemed almost miraculous. "The therapist says she's making remarkable progress," he read. "She's starting to trust again, to believe that not everyone will hurt her. We know this wouldn't have been possible without you, Jake. You saw what everyone else ignored. You fought when others looked away. You gave her a chance at a real childhood." The bar's regular crowd had thinned out, leaving Jake mostly alone with his thoughts. Through the window, he could see people walking down the street, no longer hurrying past the bar in fear. Some even waved as they passed by, offering friendly smiles where there used to be wary glances. The letter's final paragraph caught in his chest. "We want you to know that you'll always have a place in Emily's life. You're the reason she has a future now, a real chance at happiness. The other day, she told us she wants to help other kids like her when she grows up. That's your influence, Jake. You didn't just save one child. You started a ripple effect that will touch countless lives." Jake carefully folded the letter and slipped it back into its envelope. The late afternoon sun cast an amber glow across the bar, warming his face. He thought about the tough guy he'd been just months ago, the feared gang leader who kept everyone at arm's length. Now, people stopped him on the street to chat. They asked his advice, shared their concerns about other kids who might need help. Oak Ridge had changed, and so had he. The transformation wasn't just in Emily. It was in the whole town, in the way people looked at each other, in the way they looked at him. He wasn't just the scary biker anymore. He was the man who'd stood up for a child when no one else would. The familiar rumble of motorcycles filled the parking lot of the Iron Wolf Bar. But today was different. Instead of the usual rowdy atmosphere, the gang members gathered inside with a sense of purpose. Jake stood at the head of their worn wooden table, his weathered hands pressed flat against its surface, as he surveyed the faces of his men. "Things have changed," Jake began, his voice carrying across the room. "We've changed, and it's time we talked about what that means for the Iron Wolves." The gang members exchanged glances. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others nodded in agreement. They'd all witnessed the transformation over the past few months, how their fearsome reputation had slowly given way to something unexpected. Respect. "What exactly are you suggesting, Jake?" asked Mike, one of his oldest members. The man's tattooed arms were crossed over his chest, but his expression was open, curious. Jake pulled up a chair and sat down, leaning forward. "Look around. This town used to hide when we rode in. Now, they wave. They smile. All because we showed them we could be more than what they thought we were. Because of what you did for that little girl, someone called out from the back. Jake nodded slowly. Emily was just the beginning. There are more kids out there like her. More families struggling. More people who need someone to stand up for them. The bar fell silent as his words sank in. Through the windows, they could see Oak Ridge's main street, where just months ago people would hurry away at the sight of their leather vests. Now, pedestrians walked by without fear, some even offering friendly waves. "We've got power," Jake continued. "Always had it. But now we know how to use it right." Tom, a burly mechanic with graying hair, cleared his throat. "My shop's been getting more business lately. People trust us now. Maybe we could offer free repairs for folks who can't afford it?" The suggestion sparked something in the room. Suddenly, hands were raising, voices calling out ideas. "I know some families that could use help with home repairs," another member added. "We've got the skills. What about organizing events?" suggested Danny, one of the younger riders. "Community barbecues, fundraisers. Show people we're here to help, not intimidate." Jake listened, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The energy in the room was different from their usual meetings. There was excitement, purpose, something beyond the brotherhood they'd always shared. "My wife works at the school," called out Pete from near the window. "Says there are kids who can't afford proper winter clothes. We could do something about that." The suggestions kept coming, each one building on the last. Food drives, mentoring programs, emergency assistance for families in crisis. The Iron Wolves were transforming before Jake's eyes, from a group that inspired fear to one that could inspire hope. "This is what we're about now," Jake said, his voice firm but proud. "We're still a brotherhood. Still strong. But now we're using that strength to lift others up." He looked around the table, meeting each member's gaze. Some of these men had been with him through the darkest times, had followed him without question. Now they were following him down a different path, one that none of them had expected, but all of them seemed ready for. "So," Jake said, pulling out a notepad, "let's make this official. What's our first move?" The gang leaned in, their faces eager, as they began planning their new mission in Oak Ridge. The Iron Wolves were changing, and with them, the heart of the town itself. The community center buzzed with activity on a sunny afternoon. Jake sat at one of the wooden tables, going through paperwork for the gang's latest community project. His leather vest hung on the chair beside him, and his reading glasses perched on his nose made him look more like a teacher than a biker. The sound of small footsteps made him look up. Emily stood in the doorway, wearing a yellow dress with tiny flowers on it. Her hair was neatly braided, and her eyes sparkled with life, so different from the hollow-eyed child he'd first met on these very steps. "Jake," she called out, her voice clear and strong. She rushed toward him, no longer the frightened girl who flinched at sudden movements. Jake pushed his chair back and turned to face her. "Hey, kiddo. How are you doing?" Emily stopped in front of him, bouncing slightly on her toes. Her new foster mother, Sarah, stood in the doorway, giving them space but watching with a warm smile. "I got an A on my math test," Emily announced proudly, pulling a paper from her backpack. "And Mrs. Johnson said my drawing was the best in class." She handed him both papers, watching his face eagerly. Jake examined them carefully, his weathered hands gentle with her treasures. "These are amazing, Emily. You've been working hard. I wanted to tell you something else," Emily said, suddenly serious. She stood straighter, her small hands clasped in front of her. "Thank you, Jake. Thank you for helping me, for making the bad things stop." Jake's throat tightened. He'd seen grown men break down, witnessed countless tough situations, but nothing had prepared him for the simple sincerity in Emily's voice. Sarah and Tom are so nice to me, Emily continued, and I have my own room now, with purple walls, and nobody yells or— She paused, then brightened again. And I can play outside whenever I want. Jake set the papers down carefully. You deserve all of that, Emily. Every bit of it. Emily stepped forward, surprising him with a hug. Her small arms wrapped around his neck, and for a moment Jake forgot about his tough guy image. He hugged her back, careful and gentle, feeling her trust in the way she held on tight. When she pulled away, something miraculous happened. Emily smiled, not the hesitant, guarded smile he'd seen before, but a real, full smile that lit up her whole face. It transformed her, erasing the last shadows of her past pain. "I'm not scared anymore," she whispered, like sharing a special secret. Jake had to clear his throat before he could speak. "That's the best news I've heard all day," Sarah called from the doorway. "Time for piano practice, Emily." Emily gathered her papers, tucking them carefully into her backpack. "Bye, Jake." She turned and skipped, toward the door, her backpack bouncing with each step. Jake watched her go, listening to the sound of her laughter as she told Sarah about showing him her test score. The sound echoed through the community center, bright and clear, like bells ringing out hope. He sat there for a long moment, feeling the warmth of that hug, hearing the echo of that laughter. Oak Ridge had changed, and so had he. The tough biker gang leader had found something worth more than any reputation. He'd found a way to make a real difference. The sun painted Oak Ridge's main street in warm, golden hues. He'd found a stilled and colorful banners fluttered in the gentle breeze, their messages of congratulations and welcome home, Emily, bringing smiles to everyone's faces. The whole town had gathered for this special day, Emily's official adoption celebration. The courthouse steps were decorated with balloons and flowers, transforming the usually serious building into something magical. Children ran around with sparklers, their laughter mixing with the sound of music playing from speakers set up near the community center. Jake leaned against his motorcycle at the edge of the crowd, his leather vest a stark contrast to the festive atmosphere. But today, no one looked at him with fear. Parents nodded in his direction. Some even smiled. The Iron Wolves members, scattered throughout the celebration, helped serve punch and handed out cookies to excited kids. Emily stood with her new family on the courthouse steps, wearing a pretty blue dress that matched her eyes. Her hair was neatly braided, and for the first time since Jake had met her, she looked truly at peace. The shadows that used to haunt her eyes had faded, replaced by a spark of joy that made his heart swell. "Quite a change from that first day, isn't it?" Maggie appeared beside Jake, holding 2 paper cups of punch. She handed him one, her eyes twinkling. Jake nodded, taking a sip. "Never thought I'd see the day," he admitted quietly. "Look at her up there, actually smiling." The mayor stepped up to the microphone, tapping it twice before speaking. "Today marks a special moment in Oak Ridge's history," he announced. "We're not just celebrating an adoption, we're celebrating what happens when a community comes together to protect one of its own." The crowd cheered, and Jake noticed several people glancing his way. A year ago, those same looks would have been filled with suspicion and fear. Now, they held respect, even gratitude. Emily's new mother hugged her close as the mayor continued his speech. The woman who had stepped forward to adopt Emily was a teacher at the local elementary school. She and her husband had opened their hearts and home without hesitation when they learned of Emily's situation. "Would you look at that?" Maggie whispered, pointing to Emily's new father. The man was wiping tears from his eyes as he signed the final adoption papers. "That's what real love looks like." Jake felt something catch in his throat. He remembered the bruises on Emily's arms that first day, the empty look in her eyes. Now she was surrounded by people who would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. The celebration moved from the courthouse to the community center as evening approached. Tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes brought by townspeople. The iron wolves helped set up chairs and kept the music playing. Children darted between adults' legs, paper plates of cake in their hands. Emily broke away from her new parents and ran straight to Jake. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around his waist in a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice strong and clear, so different from the frightened whisper he'd first heard. Jake patted her head gently, watching as she ran back to join a group of kids her age. They were playing tag, their shrieks of delight filling the air. Maggie touched his arm. "Come on, tough guy. Time to join the party properly." Jake let himself be led toward the crowd. The setting sun cast long shadows across Oak Ridge's main street, but they weren't threatening anymore. They were just shadows. And this town, his town, had learned how to chase them away with light. The setting sun painted Oak Ridge in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the town square. Jake Thornton stood at the edge of the celebration, watching as Emily laughed with her new family. The sound of her happiness echoed through the streets, a melody he never thought he'd hear. His weathered hands rested on the railing of the community center's porch, the same spot where he'd first seen that broken little girl months ago. The memory of those bruises on her arms still made his jaw clench, but now they were replaced by the image of her bright smile. The townspeople mingled around him, their earlier fear of his presence replaced by something he hadn't expected: respect. Mrs. Henderson from the bakery had even brought him a slice of apple pie, saying it was his favorite. He couldn't remember telling her that, but somehow she knew. Jake watched as Maggie organized the cleanup, directing volunteers with gentle efficiency. She caught his eye and gave him a knowing smile. She'd been right all along. This wasn't just about saving one child. It was about changing an entire community. The evening breeze carried the scent of barbecue and the sound of country music from the portable speakers someone had set up. Kids ran around with sparklers, their faces lit up with joy. Emily was among them now, no longer the shadow of a child he'd first met. She moved with confidence, her laughter genuine and free. His gang members, the Iron Wolves, had surprised him too. They'd shown up earlier with boxes of donated toys and books for the community center. Tough men with hard faces had melted at Emily's thank you hugs. Even Crusher, his most intimidating lieutenant, had let her braid his beard. Jake shifted his weight, feeling the familiar ache in his knee from an old military injury. But tonight, the pain didn't bother him as much. He thought about all the nights he'd spent wondering if he was doing the right thing, all the times he'd questioned whether someone like him could make a real difference. The answer was right in front of him. Emily's new family had transformed their home into a haven of safety and love. Her new mother, Sarah, had the patience of a saint, working through Emily's nightmares and trust issues. Her new father, Tom, spent hours teaching her how to ride a bike and build birdhouses. They were everything Jake had hoped to find for her. As the celebration wound down, Jake noticed Emily walking towards him. She wasn't the scared little girl anymore who flinched at sudden movements. She carried herself differently now, her head held high. "Jake," she said, her voice clear and strong, "thank you for not giving up on me." The words hit him hard, right in the chest. He knelt down to her level, something he'd done that first day outside the community center. But this time, instead of seeing fear in her eyes, he saw hope. "You never needed someone to save you, kid," he said softly. "You just needed someone to believe in you." She hugged him then, her small arms wrapping around his neck. Jake closed his eyes, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. All the fights, all the struggles, all the late-night planning sessions with Maggie, it had all led to this moment. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting its final rays across Oak Ridge. Jake stood up, his heart fuller than he could remember it being. He'd found redemption in the most unexpected place, a small town that had once crossed the street to avoid him, and a little girl who had taught him more about courage than any battle ever had.